Thank you for tuning into this debate. It was pre-recorded on Friday, March 13th. We would like to acknowledge that this election and debate were held on the land of the Pokanoket, Narragansett, and Wampanoag people. Tell Brown a little bit about yourself and why you are running.
So I'm Akhilesh Raman. I'm a sophomore doing applied math econ, and I'm running for chair of the undergraduate finance board here at Brown. For me, Brown has always been a place where groups and students can pursue their interests and passion without any barrier. I think the undergraduate finance board, UFB, functions as an organization that provides funding for service groups, cultural groups, competitive groups, and any other kind of group on campus to be able to pursue their passion and their interests.
I'm Anika Aluwalia and I'm a rising sophomore, concentrating in CS and Econ from Minnesota. I served on UFB for the last year and it was a really valuable and great experience, and so that's why I'm running again, because I really love this organization. It was one of the highlights of my freshman year and I just want to be able to contribute to it and change some of the things that I thought we could do differently and keep doing some of the things that we've been doing so amazingly in this board. And I have a lot of great ideas that I would like to see next year, as well as I want to keep doing the board, keep being involved in this way. And outside of UFB in school, I'm on Smart Women Securities and Brown Data Science.
I have three major things I look forward to working on. First would be to increase the transparency that UFB has. So over the past year, we've made a lot of progress with respect to this. We've released funding data regarding the highly funded groups. As the chair, I look forward to doing this for more groups and making sure that most of the information we have is available to the Brown community. The second major thing that I look forward to doing is ensuring that service groups have funding that is equitable and that represents their contribution to this campus. In the past, UFB has often been guilty of not recognizing this, and I think we made progress this year. We changed our constitution to reflect the fact that service groups contribute indirectly in a certain sense, and we will be able to fund this activity as well. The third thing on my platform is to be able to increase the efficiency and the general equity that UFB has for different groups. I think creating subcommittees that function, we have that at the moment in UFB. I think making sure that's more organized and making sure that different members on the board work for different goals, and ensuring that as a board we can continue to build on the progress we've made and can be representative of the Brown community as a whole.
How will you apply your prior experiences towards this role as UFB chair?
So I joined UFB last year as a freshman. Towards the end, I ran as a normal representative for UFB. So I've spent close to a year on UFB. I think one of the most important things I realized during my time is that we're changing as a board. We're looking to be better. There are a lot of things that we're working on that represent changes on campus, and I think my experience working on the board, dealing with different groups, talking to them, having conversations about how we can be better, I think those discussions and that open line of communication would serve me well as the chair. I also think being able to spend time on UFB, able to understand how the policies work, how to deal with SAO administrative work, and how to deal with, basically even scheduling meetings and deciding how much time we spend on different things as a board. I think all of these factors would make sure I'm well prepared for this role.
How will you apply your prior experiences towards this role as UFB vice chair?
So I served on UFB for the last year and I learned a lot of really valuable and important things from the more senior members of the board. I learned specifically why the way that we do things is really efficient and effective and why it works for a broad variety of student groups. I also served on the e-board of Smart Women Securities this year, and I worked with them in terms of putting together budgets as well. So I was able to hear frustrations of different groups, work with different groups to see how the two sides interact, and I think putting together that experience is extremely valuable in moving forward and doing what's best for both sides.
There is a limited time frame for when you will be in this role. What would be your top 3 priorities for UFB?
One of the most important things is to make sure that UFB is transparent. And I know that is a buzzword that may not mean too much, but I think we're looking at a few concrete examples. So as a board this year, we've worked to make sure groups that are funded more than $10,000 are mandated to make sure that all their financial information is made public to the Brown community. I think extending this and making sure it's implemented, working to create more policies with respect to transparency. I think the most important thing is talking to groups, so that would be my number one priority, talking to groups to see how we would be more transparent.
Okay, my top priority would be accessibility. I feel like a lot of groups like don't know how to access their funds, don't know what their funds are, don't know how to request a budget, and then like a lot of different groups like feel as though like they aren't getting the funds that they need to fulfill their mission, while other groups are getting like exorbitant amounts of funds. So I feel like maybe like redistributing the funds and raising awareness for how to access funds and fulfill your group's mission and like what's actually within our policies would be a top priority.
Then the second most important thing, again, this is an ongoing conversation, but to see how we can be more equitable to every group on campus that we represent. And I know being equitable doesn't necessarily mean giving every group the same amount of money, but it means that we take into account their contribution and what they do. And I think that again ties back to having conversations with these clubs and groups. We increased baseline for cultural groups this year as a board. I think that was one of the decisions that impacted a lot of clubs positively on campus. So I think ensuring things like that by having constructive discussions are useful.
Another priority would be transparency. UFB has already done so much this year in terms of transparency, and I want to continue that next year, especially like with having discussions about like with the more highly funded groups about like why exactly it is that they are funded, because that was a key concern that was brought up when I was collecting signatures, and like why, like how we can like accommodate to like lower funded groups better.
And thirdly, and this is probably more an internal agenda, but I think making sure that UFB is just more efficient as a board, because there's a lot of work to be done, and we look forward to doing that work. But I think given the limited time that each one of us on the board has in these meetings, I think we can streamline this process, make it more efficient by creating subcommittees that deal with different aspects of our entire functioning. So I think looking into that more, making sure more efficient would be my third major agenda for the year.
A third one would be equity, and I think that goes hand in hand with transparency, because as we get more feedback from student groups about how they see how we're doing funding, they have their own concerns, and I think hearing from the student body about that is so important, and getting all these perspectives is really important in creating an equitable distribution.
How will you continue or expand UFB's efforts to increase its own transparency?
Yep, so I think a lot of credit firstly has to go to the chair, the vice chair, and the board over the past year, because it's very easy to be on UFB and not really care about the changes that are happening on campus. But I think an effort was made on both sides. UFB ensured that we have to be better as a board, and obviously clubs and student groups on campus have reached out to us stating that we could be better in these ways. So I think as a board we have come a long way over the past year, and I've physically seen these changes. When I joined the board at the beginning of sophomore fall for me, things were very different just compared to how they are right now. And I think I'm not looking to introduce any radical change here. I'm really looking to take forward what we have had, because like I mentioned before, it is easy to lose track of the progress we've made. I think continuing the progress, making sure that we don't lose this after a year. The continuity in UFB is something that's very important, and since I've been on the board and since I've been part of these conversations to make us more transparent, I think I will be well equipped to take this forward this year and just keep driving the progress further, because there's always another way we can improve. There are always ways we can be better, and I think I'm committed to ensuring that we find those ways and we implement them.
Yeah, so I think that having those conversations with really highly funded groups is so important, and we're already doing so much in terms of like releasing the funding breakdown. But I think that if more student groups after seeing that have more concerns, I think it's really important that we continue to hold open forums and discussions with different groups about what they want to see changed and how they would accommodate for that differently, and how what they think fits within our policies and what doesn't, and like being really transparent about what our policies are, why we choose them, how we choose them, what we see fit, and stuff like that. And then seeing like, especially like for service groups, like we had a policy that was funds will not be used if they don't directly benefit Brown students, and like having the open forum like about that specific policy policy, like when we released all the data, was so constructive, and now it directly or indirectly. So I think we need to continue having more open and honest conversations like that.
In light of recent discussions with groups that receive large funding, what are some ways you think UFB and the student body can keep those groups accountable?
Right, so I think keeping highly funded groups accountable could mean a lot of different things, and I think the conversations I've had with student groups and during open forums and discussions, accountability took two major forms. And the first form was literally releasing how much funding you get and for what you get, the funding that you do get. So that could mean, getting $1,000 for lodging or $2,000 for travel, or maybe $3,000 for 3 conferences that a certain group had to attend for the year. I think making that information public holds them accountable, because then everyone can see where the money goes to, and they can see for what it's being used and whether it satisfies the group's mission. I think UFB's role here is to hold these groups actually accountable to publishing that data, and I think we're working to make sure that process is smooth. I think a second, oftentimes overlooked aspect of accountability is highly funded groups at times tend to not be representative of the brown community. This is in no way a blanket statement, but there are times where we realize that things like diversity and inclusion are discussions that we can push forward and hold groups more accountable to. And I think as a brown community, we are incredibly diverse, and we have so many different ideas, and I think sometimes certain groups are not necessarily reflective of that. And I think UFB is uniquely positioned to make sure that highly funded groups in particular can be held accountable with that regard. So we're looking to develop ways to make sure that people of color, people who identify in the LGBTQ spectrum, underrepresented communities are represented in these groups and get the amount of funding that they should.
I think that we need to really hold them accountable for funding to the minimum. So groups like Mock Trial, Model UN, BDU, we really need to discuss with them what the minimum possible is to function as a group, and have them be extremely open and honest about that. If it's extremely imperative to their mission that they take a certain trip or that they send a certain amount of members, and keeping them open and honest and transparent to the entire student body about why exactly they need that amount of funds and why exactly it's imperative to the mission of their group to do that exact activity.
What are the ways that UFB can continue to expand its support of service groups and other groups who have historically received little funding?
So I think UFB could definitely support service groups better in a couple of tangible ways. First would be, and this is often understated, but literally talking to them more and trying to understand where they come from and trying to understand what they expect from us as a board. I don't think the board has ever had such long productive discussions as we've had in the past year, and I think as the chair I look forward to taking that further and talking to service groups more. The second aspect of it, of course, is the actual policy making from UFB's point of view, which would be discussing different options with them. Maybe it be increasing baseline funding, or maybe it be encouraging groups to ask for funding for activities that they didn't get funded in the past. And I think our change in the constitution, changing how we fund groups for how they benefit the brown community directly or indirectly, was a step in the right direction. And I think having conversations with service groups, making sure that we implement what they actually want us to implement is very important, because it's one thing for the board to just enact a slew of policies that may look productive, but it's another thing to talk to the groups who are affected by these policies and see if that would enact any actual change. So I think as the chair, I look forward to taking that further and making sure that we give service groups their fair share.
I think that we need to talk about having the new policies change. I think with the new wording in our constitution about directly and indirectly, I think that'll open a lot of doors for service groups to receive higher amounts of funding. But I think it's also about talking with them about what would be the most productive use of UFB funding for them and how we can accommodate that into our policies.
What do you think is the largest challenge that UFB currently faces, and what would you do to resolve it?
So I think one of the biggest challenges, at least from what I've seen during my past year at UFB, is the fact that it's about creating awareness about what the board is, what the board does, and and what the board can do better. Because I think oftentimes, so I walk around getting signatures for elections, and I have conversations with the different members of the Brown community, and oftentimes they're not very aware of what UFB does, and I think most of that falls on us as a board to be more active in letting the Brown community know that we have this much money that we can allocate for all these different groups. I think making sure that students are aware of what we do, and students are aware of how they can reach out to us and talk to us about their issues. I think that is a challenge I've seen over the past year, and as the chair I will definitely work hard to overcome that and make sure we are more accessible.
I think that the largest challenge that we face right now is the service groups challenge in terms of funding them and being able to use UFB funds in a way that all students on campus see fit. And I think that we need to open up that discussion to all of campus and have a broader discussion about whether funds should be used for things that do not necessarily directly benefit Brown students, and where the line is for that necessarily, because it's not necessarily just up to the whole board, but it impacts the entire student body.
Closing statement.
I do recognize that for this role I am running unopposed, and I'd like to take this opportunity to reach out directly to all the different student groups on campus, Category 3 to every group, service groups, cultural groups, competitive groups. I'd like to use this opportunity to reach out to them and convey a message that UFB is working to always be that for you. I think that was not always clear in our communication in the past, but we are committed to making sure that everything we do is for the benefit of each and every one of your clubs, and also for the benefit of the Brown community. And I would highly encourage any criticism of the board or any discussion you want to have with the board, feel free to reach out to me or the incoming vice chair or any other member on the board to talk about these issues that actually impact you. Because I think the more open the board is, the better we are as a whole. And I think this is a good opportunity for me to reach out to every group on campus to convey this message. And another thing I'd like to talk about, of course, is the recent crisis that we have, the coronavirus. I think these are testing times for all of us as a Brown community, and UFB is working hard to ensure that we can help the university, help the students, help people who need it the most in whatever little way that we can. And I'd like to state that this is a hard time for all of us. Stay safe, stay healthy, but I do believe that as a Brown community we shall overcome and be better for it.
The time I've served on UFB has been extremely educational and really amazing this past year, and I hope to be able to continue that in future years and implement new ideas while preserving the old traditions that have worked so well for us in the past. Thank you.